Welcome to the 63rd episode of our Crossing Thin Ice podcast series, where twice a month we tackle risk management topics. Our aim for these podcasts is to help with your ERM program and general risk knowledge. We encourage you to share with anyone interested in lifelong learning about risk management, and we welcome your feedback. You can also find Crossing Thin Ice in your Substack feed. My name is Max Rudolph, and as always, I'm joined by Dave Ingram. Today, Dave is going to share a way for practitioners to use large language models to simulate role-playing games. Whether you're looking for a contrarian to challenge your ideas or just a different perspective, these AI simulations can improve your discussions or bring a new team member up to speed. As a reminder, nothing in today's podcast is intended to be investment advice. We are here to provide educational material on risk topics without getting lost in the weeds.
We have all had the experience of walking away from a situation and then realizing that there's something much better that we should have said. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a way that we can all use with AI to help us to practice for those most important occasions so that maybe we'll know just what to say in the moment instead of in the hallway on the way home. When you're prompting a large language model, it's pretty standard to start a prompt by telling AI that it is an expert at whatever topic you're planning to ask it to talk about. You're telling the large language model to play a role. And if you hang out in the wrong subreddits, you can hear about people who tell their large language models that they are an evil dwarf or a fair princess. They are role-playing game players who are building and inhabiting simulated fantasy worlds with the help of AI. I noticed a suggestion somewhere that it was possible to combine the two ideas and have AI support a business simulation. And I was off to the races using AI assistant technology to build a customized business simulation where actuaries and chief risk officers were the characters, and their quest was to save the company from some calamity. In those business simulations, our hero, the user, is usually given a problem to resolve, and is then joined either by an assistant or some other person who acts as an obstacle, sometimes, other times a helper, and they continue down the path towards glory. In my simulations, the hero is usually met by a wise person at the end of the story who will help the hero to understand how well they performed on their journey. I've taken this idea further and developed an entire modularized approach to an AI simulation that can be adapted to almost any situation that you might want to try. These modularized components can be mixed and matched to create dozens of combinations of simulations, making for a highly varied experience. The purpose of these simulations is to give the user exposure to new situations or to practice their communication skills with different audiences. Imagine stepping into the shoes of a chief risk officer during a sudden crisis where immediate and strategic responses are critical, or perhaps a major reinsurer that your company relies on is rumored to be in financial trouble, and senior leadership urgently seeks your guidance as the chief risk officer. In another scenario, imagine being tasked by the board with a comprehensive refresh of your company's risk appetite statement, managing diverse and potentially conflicting views in the boardroom, or stepping into the role of a chief actuary faced with evaluating an innovative insurance product that promises growth but that brings uncharted risks. You will even find yourself advising executive leadership on the strategic use of surplus capital, weighing risk-adjusted returns across various growth proposals. Depending on the simulation's goals, your interactions might vary dramatically. You might encounter a supervisor whose managerial style is different and results-oriented, but who tends to be overly critical. You could be paired with someone whose relentless questioning, though eager and well-intentioned, might feel overwhelming. Perhaps you will work alongside a forward-thinking actuary who tends to leverage technology creatively to solve complex problems. Or you might be facing off with a sharp, outspoken contrarian who consistently challenges group consensus to maintain intellectual rigor. Another scenario might involve collaborating with a highly adaptable team player who excels at fostering inclusivity, but who might inadvertently miss the nuances of cultural norms. As the simulation concludes, you'll typically receive insightful feedback from notable figures whose styles are instantly recognizable, adding authenticity to the experience. Imagine receiving guidance from someone who embodies Jack Welch's decisive leadership, the strategic insights of Indra Nooyi, or the innovative perspective of Steve Jobs. Feedback could come from a marketing visionary like Elon Musk, or even from a person with the empathetic clarity of Michelle Obama. The feedback itself targets key competencies that you wish to enhance. You would focus on improving clarity and precision, ensuring logical flow, or deepening your argument's completeness and relevance. Perhaps technical accuracy is critical for your scenario. You might seek to sharpen your call to action skills. Adaptability, prioritization, and leadership styles might be assessed, along with your ability to navigate regulatory environments or communicate persuasively across cultures. The transformative vision you bring to the table might also be under review. All of these modular simulation components are neatly documented in separate files. This means you can quickly experiment with different combinations, creating varied and enriching experience each time you practice. These simulations have practical benefits, particularly for chief risk officers and their teams. They offer invaluable preparation for scenarios such as onboarding new CROs, developing and strengthening a company's risk culture, or honing presentations for executives and boards. They're equally effective for emerging risk scenario planning or for training mid-level staff who aspire to senior roles. Repeated practice ensures these critical scenarios become familiar, empowering risk managers and actuaries to perform confidently and effectively when real-world challenges arise.
So, Dave, what tools or platforms are needed to run these AI simulations?
Well, Max, interestingly, they're all running, and a number of the applications that I've developed all run on what's called an AI assistant. And that's not a particularly descriptive term, but it refers to products like what ChatGPT calls a custom GPT, what Google calls a gem on its Gemini system, and what another system that I use called Poe calls a bot. What they all are is just a simple combination of a saved prompt, as opposed to the prompts that you're usually typing in every time, and also some saved files. So it's not a special system, but it is a special feature of those systems.
Okay, and what kind of onboarding or instructions are needed for someone unfamiliar with artificial intelligence prompting to effectively use these simulations?
I think there is a learning curve for this. If you're not used to prompting at all, this may sound a little strange, but it may actually be easier if you're not used to doing the prompting, because for these simulations, you're not actually writing prompts. You're having a conversation. So the biggest hurdle to overcome is to convince people, no, just type in what you would say in that situation.
And how do you determine which simulation scenario is best suited for a specific use case, like CRO onboarding versus board presentation preparation?
I think the user has to figure that one out. What do they want to learn about? What do they want to practice doing? Where are their weaknesses that they would like to explore? If there's a situation that you would like to do a practice of, anything you're going to do, I mean, you have to present your work to the chief actuary next week. Would you like to practice that? Well, I can remember days in my career when I would have loved to have practiced that, because when I went into the chief actuary's office, I went on and on and on too much, as young actuaries sometimes do, trying to tell them about all the wonderful nuances in my work.
Yeah, it's an acquired skill set to know your audience and know, with one supervisor, maybe they want to hear all the details, and another one just wants a picture that tells 1,000 words. So for use cases like emerging risk scenario planning, how do simulations handle rapidly evolving content or new risks not yet built into the system?
When you're designing these, you have a choice. You can tell it a very specific risk to use, or you can tell it to look out on the internet and find an emerging risk to talk about. And still, you may not get the kind of diversity you're wanting. The way the systems work, I told you just a minute ago that you didn't need to think of these as prompts, but in fact, you can prompt it at any time. You can tell it, today I want to work on this in the middle of the discussion you're having, and suddenly, instead of having a conversation, you're giving a command, and it will follow that command. So you can specify any details, change any details to the scenario on the fly when you're running these models.
Dave, can these simulations be used in a team setting, or are they designed strictly for solo use?
Well, that was a design consideration I had with the original version of this was would I create a head-to-head version, and I'd gone pretty far down the road of designing it and then stopped. So I think they can be used in a team setting where the team would work together to come up with what to say, or they can be done in a team setting, like I said, with different people running the same situation and then comparing how they dealt with the same issues. These models are interesting though, because even if two different people give very similar answers, the responses of the AI simulation are going to be somewhat different and may wind up taking the different users in very different directions. And that's just part of the nature of the large language models.
So it might make sense to do this several times with different models to see kind of a range of answers.
With different models, or even with the same model,
Okay.
and see, because these systems are all probabilistic in what they're doing. And in fact, in some of the models, in that Poe system I mentioned, for instance, there is an easily accessible setting uh, for a feature that's called temperature. And if you set the temperature higher, its range of responses gets to be more variable. So, as I said, it's probabilistic what it's deciding to say. And so by setting the temperature higher, you give it a wider range of possible choices that it might look at. So if you set the temperature high, running it over and over again, you're likely to get different responses.
It reminds me of the backstory behind the common term, that a butterfly flapped its wings, on the other side of the world and changed things happening here, where apparently someone was running a large model that ran for, days or maybe weeks, and he wanted to kind of just test it out. And so he wanted to run a shorter version. And so he took some preliminary results. So, say he was running it for 30 years, he took results from like 15 years in and ran it from there with what the parameters were at that point. And the results to today were just totally different. And what he found was that in the computer, it's being stored to maybe 32 decimal places or something like that. But the printouts that he had only went out 4 or 5 decimal places. And when he was typing that in, losing just that, what seems like a very small discrepancy, made a huge amount of difference. So it is interesting you always want to test your model just the same way that you're testing everything else. So, Dave, what role do you see simulations playing in shaping organizational risk culture, especially in firms that are trying to become more agile or anticipatory in their risk management?
Well, that's an interesting application, Max, that I hadn't really thought through at all before you just asked that. But you could imagine that if you were trying to use it to shape the risk culture, you'd want to imagine situations where you saw your risk culture as doing one sort of thing versus another risk culture doing another. And then in the simulations that I do, usually there's a feedback stage at the end. And so you can specifically program the feedback stage to give feedback that aligns with your risk culture. So that's where you'd bring it in on the feedback element of that. And then if you have many people then using that simulation and getting that feedback, I think that would be a good way of promulgating a risk culture, and certainly if you're trying to change a risk culture or form a risk culture where you're not sure what you had.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Crossing Thin Ice about using AI simulations for needs like emerging risk scans or preparation for board presentations. If you found it valuable, please like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues.